Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to my new episode of 4¼ Sports, presented by me, Gregory Richardson, here on Puritans Radio. Today, I hope that you're able to strap yourselves in for a story, because I have got something very, very special in store for you, as I am taking you on an adventure from Banbury Train Station to Wembley Stadium, where the Betfred Challenge Cup finals took place last Saturday, and what an occasion it was, despite the much expected treacherous conditions in the afternoon. Anyway, it was my first ever time at Wembley, and it is fair to say that getting there from Banbury Train Station is incredibly straightforward, so much so that it almost seemed too good to be true after experiencing some difficulties getting to other London venues in recent times. If you ever consider going in future, I would recommend getting on an early train heading towards London Marylebone, on which Wembley Stadium is the penultimate stop, as in the one before London Marylebone. As it was my first time going, I decided to get on an 8:40 train to try and avoid the crowds, which thankfully I managed to achieve, much to my delight. When I got to Wembley Station then, I stepped off the train, making sure to mind the gap, of course, that's essential, and I walked up the steps leading up off the platform, and very much to my amazement, there was actually a sign, which said, "Turn right for Wembley Stadium," and then when I had hardly walked 20 yards or so, I was looking right at the famous arch and a part of the building. I was so happy and just really thrilled to be standing right there looking at the famous venue right in front of my eyes. Furthermore, there were signs indicating to fans which direction to go in, depending upon which colour section you were sitting in, and it said for the red zone that I should keep following the road and that I should walk up the hill. So I did just that, as I was fairly certain that I had seen that I had a red zone ticket, and before I knew it, I was looking right at the turnstile I needed to use to take my seat, come a couple of minutes after 11 o'clock. Having been to both the Allianz Stadium, as it is now called, and the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, both in the last 12 months, I can honestly tell you that getting to Wembley Stadium is by far the easiest thing in the world. Honestly, it really is. You don't have to change anywhere. It's just one train, and it takes only 58 minutes. And then, when you get off the train, it is just a 2 to 3 minute walk from the station to be inside the ground, or at least on the side that I was on last weekend. I decided to be there so I could soak in the atmosphere, so I could not enter the ground at that moment, and there was a feeling of familiarity as I heard Pete from Northampton Saints practicing his announcing from just outside the stadium, and I knew that I was definitely in the right place at that point, if ever there was any remaining doubt. What I had not realised, though, is Pete is also known as the voice of rugby league, according to the matchday programme, and if I understood what was said on the PA system correctly, last Saturday was his 26th Challenge Cup with the pitch-side microphone in his hand, and what an historic occasion it was too. That being said, as the sun gradually peeped through the heavy grey clouds, it was now time to buy the essential souvenirs, and thankfully that was easy too. Opposite the ground and across a narrow road were two stalls, one selling the traditional matchday scarves and another already selling burgers, even though it was still really early. However, they did smell good. Upon arrival at approximately 10 a.m, I also noticed that a lady was already selling match programmes just outside Gate N, so I approached the mini stand and politely asked her if I could buy one. It cost me £10, but I always like such a souvenir, especially as it was my first ever time at a Challenge Cup finals day out. That, along with the Warrington Hull KR matchday scarf, which I am wearing as I speak, meant that I had already spent £31, but it was worth it from my point of view. What very much disappoints me, however, is the fact that there was no such scarf for the ladies' final. Wigan Warriors were playing St Helens in a final, which also happened to be a derby, starting at 11:45, and it was impossible to buy a scarf as a souvenir for that match. It really needs to change going forwards, it really does, especially if England Rugby League wishes to grow the women's game and potentially inspire the next generation of players further north. Anyway, much to my surprise, again, the sun was continuing to break through the clouds at this point, and it was very surprisingly a glorious warm morning, as rain had been forecast every day leading up to the occasion. However, because it was still too early to enter the arena, I walked back down the hill alongside Wembley and down some steps to head towards the shopping centre, which had a Marks and Spencer's in it, just in case anyone might be interested. And if you turn right and walk along the pathway, on the left-hand side, you'll see a Costa Coffee and a Prêt-à-Manger restaurant. In that moment, I really fancied a warmed-up ham and cheese toastie. So I stepped into Prêt-à-Manger and I also ordered a hot chocolate and a granola for pudding to go alongside it. The staff were very kind and polite, and I managed to grab myself a table by the window, which enabled me to watch the world go by, whilst also having some time to chill out and soak up the atmosphere whilst eating, before then dipping into the match programme to have a look at what was in store for people like myself who were attending the event. Alongside me at the next table were 3 men who were wearing a Betfred lanyard, and when I asked them about potential numbers for the day, purely out of curiosity after noticing a significant drop in numbers in recent years, they seemed fairly confident of a large crowd for the men's game. Although, rather surprisingly, despite Wembley looking more full than it did last year from the pictures that I saw, there were actually only 63,278 watching on as Warrington Wolves and Hull KR did battle in the rain, which began falling at 3:10 in the afternoon, meaning that there were approximately 1,500 less people than at the final played between Warrington Wolves and Wigan Warriors this time last year. Although, having said that, there was still much more footfall than when Lee Leopards clinched the game in Golden Point, also against Hull KR, just under 2 years ago. Anyway, more by accident than planned, I managed to time my morning more or less to perfection, because by the time I had put my programme back into my backpack, it was time for me to quickly finish my hot chocolate whilst walking back up the stairs and back up the hill as the clock ticked towards 11 o'clock. As I stepped out of Prêt-à-Manger back onto the pathway, I began making my way towards the steps, but before I got there, I noticed 2 very passionate Hull Kingston Rovers fans, and I politely began speaking to them. Out of interest, I asked them if they came this morning and how long it took them to get to Wembley, and they said that they left at 6 o'clock in the morning. That really is commitment right there, especially when you do not know whether your side is going to come out on top or not. Amazingly, they were very much in admiration of my half and half matchday scarf, wondering which team I was supporting. But in that moment, I was able to explain that I was not from the north, but that I did have an interest in rugby league dating back many years, just because I happened to come across it, and I enjoyed the fact that it was slightly different from rugby union. Anyway, I explained to them that I was a neutral and that I had come to Wembley to experience the atmosphere and the final, and that I was very much looking forward to being able to watch as a neutral. Anyway, in that moment, I wished them good luck for the day before heading back up the hill, and, much to my amazement, the Royal Air Force Guards were just finishing their practice ahead of 2 pre-match marches, which would take place in the build-up to kick off ahead of both the women's and the men's finals, respectively. They were all dressed very smartly in their blue and gold uniforms, and I was fortunate enough to be able to tell them so, and that put a really big smile on my face as well as theirs, I think. Rather annoyingly though, that smile was wiped off my face hardly 2 minutes later as a security guard positioned outside the ground said I would be all right to keep my water bottle and carry it inside with me. But the lady who checked my bags inside the venue said that I had to take the lid off and tip out all of the water that was left in it. In a literal sense, that was £3 down the drain, so just as well I was able to keep the bottle and refill it at the water refill points as the day went on, although that was a bit of a harsh lesson learned. When I go back to Wembley on Saturday 25th October for the first of the ABK Beer Ashes series between England and Australia, I will make sure to take an empty water bottle with me to fill up inside the ground when I get there. That was proof that you live and learn right there. Anyway, the fun was about to begin and I caught my first ever glimpse of the hallowed Wembley Stadium turf through entrance 127, although I knew from the seat map and the displayed angle of my view of the ground that I was not quite in the right place. The very kind staff guided me around to entrance 125 and I could tell then, in that moment, that I was in my spot where I needed to be. What a view! I had the best of both worlds, a slightly cheaper ticket, but also an excellent view from 25 metres out from the goalposts at one end, whilst also having an excellent view of the rest of the field as I looked towards the other end. It is fair to say that numbers were extremely low for the women's game, so much so that you could hear any echo of someone screaming, "Come on Wigan," or "Let's go St Helens," whenever such a cry was let out from the stands. Just quickly, for those that did not watch the women's game, you all missed a cracker. Rather unfortunately, I happened to overhear a gentleman saying on the phone at half-time at one point that the women's game was just a curtain raiser before the men's game, which felt a bit disrespectful because Wigan were incredible for the full 80 minutes and St Helens did have their moments as well. I mentioned Wigan's scoring potential during last week's episode and they duly delivered on that front. You have to be an excellent attacking team to score 3 tries under the posts in rugby, regardless of the code, and you could tell that St Helens were shell-shocked. In fact, they barely had an answer to their route. Izzy Rowe landed all 3 conversion attempts from right in front of the sticks, and at 18-0 up, the odds were very much in Wigan's favour. And not long after the interval, when I'd barely settled down with my large sweet and salty box of popcorn, they were in again through Isabel Rowe, and she then had the nous to convert her own try. Suddenly, 18-0 had become 24-0, and although doubt was planted in Wigan's minds as St Helens responded through Katie Mottershead, it became a try-fest and a very one-sided affair as the Wigan Warriors eventually ran out 42 points to 6 winners in the most one-sided final I think I have seen in any ball sport, with player of the match Grace Banks scoring a runaway try to put the cherry on the top in the closing stages. St Helens were carrying the favourites tag going into the game after winning 4 consecutive finals prior to last Saturday, but Wigan proved how much of a threat they are with ball in hand this season, and they were ultimately deserved winners on the day as they claimed their first ever Challenge Cup trophy. There was a lot of running rugby and the entertainment was top notch. Therefore, it was a real shame that the skies darkened and the floodlights were turned on as the Warriors captain Victoria Molyneux lifted the trophy with just over an hour to go until kick-off in the men's showdown. As I mentioned just a moment ago, the clouds rolled in as the Warrington and Hull KR fans flocked into the ground in their numbers. The drums at the Warrington end, so in the West Stand, were being played as if there was no tomorrow as we approached 2 o'clock, and just after the hour, Mikey Lewis appeared from the dressing room to begin his warm-up, and he was met by jeers. I mean, it was unbelievable, and he had the arrogance and enthusiasm to go up to the touchline and clap the boos and jeers. What a fantastic atmosphere. I had never seen anything like it. That, of course, was rivaled by the cheers from the Robins fans. It was just the warm-ups, and the Wire fans were singing their songs, and in contrast to the boos among Mikey Lewis's emergence onto the field, Mark Sneed's appearance from the tunnel was greeted in a loud roar at the Warrington end and loud jeers from the other. It was just incredible. It was superb. I was actually trying not to laugh. It was magnificent. The players were out warming up for about 30 to 35 minutes or so, and just as the players went back into the dressing room to get their match kit on, the traditional Red Red Robin song was being played out on the loud PA system, much to the delight of their fans who made the trip from East Hull. Then, the central band of the Royal Air Force began marching onto the turf for the pre-match ceremony, and as we approached 10 to 3, we all stood respectfully for the traditional rugby league anthem of Abide With Me, sung by Lizzie Jones, 10 years on from her debut here at Wembley, in memory of her husband, Danny Jones, who passed away when he was playing for Keighley Cougars against London Scholars, according to the Matchday programme. Let's just take a moment then to be respectful and listen to her incredible emotional performance. Those flames certainly took me by surprise on that occasion, but ultimately signified that kickoff was getting closer and closer. They certainly set the tone for a ferocious contest, but before we could get underway, there was the small matter of welcoming the two teams onto the field before then standing respectfully for the national anthem, God Save the King, also sung by Lizzie Jones. Then, as the Royal Air Force Band made their way off the field in their perfect marching formation, Wembley was a cauldron of noise, and you could not hear yourself think for even a fraction of a second, especially with the combination of the flames and the drums at both ends of the ground. What an occasion, and if ever an atmosphere was electric, this was it. I'd never witnessed anything like it, ever. I was amazed by the passion and the hunger for Challenge Cup success, for sure. I mean, for those who remember what happened last year, Warrington was seeking revenge, despite the different opposition, and Hull KR were also looking to abolish any memory of that heartbreaking loss to Lee when Lachlan Lamb hit an ugly drop goal over the bar to inflict defeat upon them in Golden Point at the final in 2023. So then, we were in for a cracker, and so, just for a moment, I've taken myself back to my seat in the South Stand prior to kick-off to remind myself of the epic countdown before Mark Sneyd got us underway with his boot from the halfway line. Yes, at 1 minute past 3, the game was underway and Hull KR took the ball in cleanly initially, but unfortunately the rain began falling after just 10 minutes had been played, so it then became the arm wrestle that I more or less predicted beforehand, knowing what the weather forecast was supposed to be, although I felt there was potential for more scoring. However, as I said in the build-up last week, it was a final that could disappoint, and I think it is fair to say that despite the combination of the excitement of it being my first time at Wembley, the electric atmosphere and the potential of the event, that the match did not quite live up to the hype, although I was right in saying that it would be one kick in it, which in itself made it tense and dramatic, which is what we love about finals. It was gripping, it really was. The thrill of every kick and every tackle was incredible, and the fact that every mistake could prove costly just added to the drama. It really was edge of the seat and knuckle-biting stuff. There was a lot of back and forth, and kicks were made with a lot of pressure on the chase, and both teams got away with some high tackles in the opening minutes, which I felt should have been called, although, for some reason, Rugby League is never quite as harsh on head contacts as they are in Rugby Union, and perhaps Liam Moore let the occasion get to him in a few of those early, nervy moments. Anyway, there was not much going on as defences were massively on top, and when a high tackle from Ben Curry was penalised within kicking range on the angle, Mikey Lewis duly took advantage to put the Robins 2-0 up, and it looked for a while as though that would be the only score of the first half until the Wolves received a huge slice of luck as an aimless kick from Mark Sneyd bobbled and took a deflection which enabled Josh Tulis to go over in the right-hand corner, and Sneyd did the rest with the boot. At 6 points to 2, Hull KR were going to need at least a try to win the match, although Warrington and Sneyd had chances aplenty from under the post to sit back in the pocket and take 2 to 3 drop goals in the second half, which would have nudged them up to 8 or even 9 points had they taken 3 chances, and at 9-2 up, the Wolves would have had an unassailable lead. Instead though, George Williams's troops kept trying to muscle their way over the line, but some loose passes and a few other inaccuracies enabled Hull KR to get out of jail, and they were extremely lucky to score a try through Tom Davies, who just about got a hand on the bobbling ball in the grease and the wet before it crossed the dead ball line. There was drama, though, as Mikey Lewis still needed to land the conversion to avoid any chance of Golden Point, and despite the jeering, he nailed it, and the roars told you everything that you needed to know. Warrington had come up short yet again, and Hull KR managed to avenge their August 2023 defeat here to Lee Leopards, whilst also avenging their disappointing Super League Grand Final display at Old Trafford against Wigan Warriors last autumn. In claiming their first Challenge Cup trophy in 45 years, the Robins can use this momentum going forwards, whereas Warrington now face the tough ask of climbing the league table, needing a 6th place finish to have a chance of making the final in October. St Burgess will be disappointed, especially as there was a lot of talk about winning the match this time, something that was very much in their grasp with all the possession and territory that they had. I've already mentioned the lack of drop goal attempts, but honestly, how many times do I say it? In finals, the only statistic that matters is the scoreline. They were right in front of the posts at least 3 times, and with Snead's kicking abilities, they really should have won that game. It was always going to come down to a kick or two, as I predicted, and this time that kick was in Hull KR's favour, which was not the case just under 2 years ago against the Leopards, as aforementioned. It might be harsh, but I will say that Warrington only have themselves to blame at the end of the day. How many times do I say it? Points, 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 Warrington, points. It is a final. I kept saying to the lovely Warrington fans sitting next to me, who were in agreement with my analysis, that drop goals should be taken. Brilliant Rugby does not necessarily win such a game, and I am sure that they will have been kicking themselves going back up the M1 and M6 on Saturday evening after that narrow 8-6 defeat, as it really could not have been any closer. What a game and what a day, and after such a brilliant time, it was time to dig out my raincoat out of my backpack, put it on, zip it up, and head out of the shelter that was Wembley Stadium and into the pouring rain. In that moment, I really felt sorry for the players, and I could immediately empathise with the quality of the match, as it took no more than 3 minutes of walking to the train station to nearly be soaked to the skin, although thankfully the train back to Banbury Station was hardly more than a minute away when I went down the steps onto the platform after walking through the pink queue barriers. Yes, all good things come to an end, and it was time to go home, and as Pete reminded everyone at the ground, the first test of the ABK Ashes series is back here at Wembley Stadium on Saturday, 25th October at 2:30 p.m, and that promises to be an epic encounter. You better be quick to buy any remaining tickets, because Everton and Leeds are both already sold out. I hope that I might have inspired you to make the trip in 4 months' time, but anyway, from a personal perspective, as I got on the 5:38 train, almost a drowned rat, I could not help but smile at the fact that I had now, very fortunately, completed my tour of all British and Irish iconic rugby grounds, unless you include Headingley or Old Trafford, although I have to say, purely for the convenience and the novelty factor, I guess my day out at Wembley was probably my favourite of them all, and I already cannot wait for that England against Kangaroos test match. Anyway, just in case you were wondering, I got back to Banbury all safe and sound at just before 20 minutes to 7, and I was home at 7 o'clock, in time to dry off, have some tea, and settle down in front of some T20 cricket, rather ironically. Anyway, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on my latest adventure. I hope that you potentially manage to visit Wembley at some point, even if it is just for a stadium tour, because it would definitely be worth your while, I promise you. I also hope that you enjoyed today's unique insight into Rugby League's big day out at Wembley Stadium, and that I may have inspired you to go next year, because it will, of course, be on again in 2026, early in June, because from the 2024 season, the event shifted from August to June. For now, though, that is all that I've got time for in this week's episode, and it is time for me to hand you back to Ian Fleming for the rest of today's 007 magazine show live. And on that note, I wonder what the next song is going to be. Ian, it's back to you. Take care, everyone, and have a great weekend.